And welcome back. My name is Mark Saul. Welcome back to Politico's AI Summit. And to finish off, last but not least, we have the European Vice President for Values and Transparency, Věra Jourová. Thank you for joining us from Brussels. Before we get going in the conversation, there's a few housekeeping things so we can get this as interactive as possible. If you do want to ask questions, and I would urge you to do so, please could you go to the Swapcard app and put your questions next to the live stream, and I will get to as many of them as possible. Also, I'll be checking our Twitter during this, so if you have any questions or comments on that, please use the hashtag Politico AI. So with that out of the way, let's get to the conversation. Commissioner, thank you for joining us. A lot of the conversation we're having today is... Well, a lot of the conversation we've had today touches on a lot of everything that is AI, from data access to cooperation with international partners, to maybe some of the downsides and some of the things we need to do to mitigate that. The thing that strikes me when I look at the European Union's perspective on this, it's all about ethics, putting human rights first, and the values that the EU has in terms of how data should be used, what should and should not be used for AI, etc. But earlier today, we had a conversation with Eric Schmidt, and the former Google CEO, and who chairs the National Security Commission on AI for the US, and he was really quite critical of the European Union's approach of putting regulation first before even investing in AI. And I just wanted to get your thoughts of, if the whole point with the European Union's approach is about ethics and about global cooperation, I would argue that the US is arguably Europe's closest ally. And if maybe the US is not seeing eye to eye on what Europe is doing, how would the Commission and the EU hope to bring others on board on their sort of ethical view of what AI regulation should look like?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me once again, and thank you for the first question. Well, what we see over at least a decade, when we see the very rapid technological development, the speed of money and technology is quicker than the speed of law. And that's why, let me share with you my very trivial idea that the real world is still much better than what is mirroring in the internet and in the world of technologies. And maybe it's because there are missing the rules, the ethical standards, the rules of basic decency, but also the rules of what should be respected fully in online sphere. So I think that it's important that the EU is continuing its endeavor to both promote the innovations and invest in the technologies, including AI, and you can see it on the new budget of the EU, and to come with meaningful rules which are addressing the risks, emerging risks, the risks which can be foreseen in the future. That's the difficult thing on regulating technologies, that we are in fact a kind of regulating the technologies which still do not exist, but we try to predict the future risks. And so we are at the forefront of this endeavor because we have no one to follow in the global arena. And that's why we also kind of waited with the regulation regarding AI. As you know, we first came with the ethical standards, then with the white book, and over time we were consulting with the businesses, with the researchers, with the public sector, with the civil society on how to do this right, to come with the regulation which will address the risks and which will leave a lot of space for innovations, which Europe needs. We need to decrease the gap between the United States and the EU in the development and usage of technologies. And we are doing it in European way. This is already a well-known phrase that we are coming with the rules with full human-centric approach. We are looking at the rights of every individual. we have a bedrock or the foundation in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which have to be respected also in the digital space or in the space created by AI, and so this is where we are, I think, very consistent, because you could also have seen this approach in the GDPR, which is now 3 years old.
Sure. But I suppose my question is that AI is not like data protection, because data protection had been around for decades and AI is relatively new. Is there not a concern that without greater investment in Europe's AI, you might create a rule book that no one else follows?
Can you repeat the question? I didn't hear it properly.
Sure. Of course. I suppose my question is, right now, AI is still a very nascent and early stage technology, really.
Yeah.
And without greater investment, Europe may create a rule book that only Europe follows and no one else does. And is that not a concern for you?
Oh, it's not. It's not, because we are now, especially now, opening a lot of different fora where we discuss the technologies, the AI, which, as you say, is a relatively new technology, emerging rapidly. So we are discussing the developments with our partners globally and through multilateral fora, especially the recent initiative we saw in G7, which where the partners decided to continue common work on AI and on technologies in broader context. And of course, we are very much interested in opening the new chapter in our cooperation with the United States. We would like to approach towards the agreement on AI with the United States, and also with other like-minded partners such as Japan or South Korea, where we are now at the last mile negotiating the adequacy decision on privacy. So we are opened up for the cooperation, and I don't think personally that Europe is the only one who has the patent for inventing the rules for technologies, including AI. Vice versa, we believe that in cooperation we can inspire each other, and especially, I have to repeat it, with the United States, there is a very, very broad space now open for inventing common ideas. But we could not wait for the United States. As you know, we already adopted the legislation on AI, which is risk-based or risk-oriented. The package, I believe, is a very balanced one, and we are inviting the partners, including the US, to continue working on that.
President Biden is coming to town in a couple of weeks, and the European President von der Leyen mentioned, I think back in December, some sort of hope or expectation of a transatlantic accord on AI. Would we expect to see any update on that in terms of cooperation with the United States when the US President comes to town in a couple of weeks?
I believe that the summit will show several tracks for enhanced cooperation between the US and European Union, and definitely the cooperation on technologies will be one of them, because when we discuss or when we outline the list of possible risks which might require some regulation, in fact, we are facing the same risks and same challenges, be it in the EU and United States. So I'm sure that the summit will cover the technologies and the digital development and the AI sphere as well, and that it will be opening up for concrete work of concrete expert teams, concrete ways of cooperation for the near future. I speak still about this year. I believe that we will move on.
And is that specifically with the US, or do you want to do that with the other G7, G20 partners?
Of course, G7 now is a good opportunity, which I think at the end of April there was that I have it somewhere here. There was that digital and tech ministerial with very clear conclusions where they would like to work together, supply chain, diversification, digital technical standards, data free flow with trust, which is my topic, internet safety, digital competition, and one more. And I think that this is a very good way forward for G7. But at the same time, we already outlined how we see the cooperation with the third countries, not only with US, but others in our digital decade. So we are expressing through many different fora and different debates that we are open and that we expect the partners to strengthen also our efforts, not only in the field of regulation, because we have to see this in from a broader perspective. I always see the triangle that we need the meaningful, smart rules, but also well-targeted investments, which we already hope to see through our recovery package and the budget of the EU for 2021-27. And the third is the cooperation and deploying the best brains. And so it means the support of researchers and the academic sphere, which should cooperate with the business. So I think that the push from business towards the research has always been seen as a very big success story in the United States. This is where we should do more in European Union, this bridge between the research and the business.
Well, one thing that the business does say, and this is not just AI rules, but also when it comes to the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Governance Act, Data Governance Act, excuse me, that there is too much regulation coming out of Europe and not enough investment. And you look at the United States and they maybe have too much investment and not enough regulation. So is there not a better balance to be struck in terms of a lot of rules coming out of Brussels right now on regulation? Is that being matched by investment, both from the EU, from the Brussels, as well as member states?
Mm-hmm. When you pile it up like that, of course, it sounds as a horrifying attack of regulators on the world of innovations and technologies and businesses. But we have to look into what the single or concrete pieces of legislation cover. And I think that for the Digital Services Act, well, we needed to act because we simply see that the big platforms and big tech, they already gain too much power without adequate responsibility. So this is about increasing responsibility and increasing transparency, because coming back to our human-centric approach, we really need the people to be empowered to understand better what's happening to them when they kind of move with their personal data and with their activities and thoughts to the internet, to the platforms, and they should be able to have their identity under control. They should be able to leave the space when they want, and so on. So the Digital Services Act was long awaited, because up to now we are cooperating with the big tech. We have code of practice against disinformation and code of conduct against hate speech, but we cannot continue forever like that. And if somebody is following what's happening in Europe in concrete member states, you can see that already several member states decided to go their way. And it would be a big failure of the EU, of the Commission as well, to allow for the fragmentation of the legal order. And because this would be end of building the digital single market, by the way. For Digital Markets Act, well, again, I think nobody was surprised that we need to come with the rules which will increase fairness for the competition in the EU. And as for the Data Governance Act and data strategy, again, we are lagging behind in innovations and in investments in innovations, also in AI sphere. But what we need most is the data. And we have to be able to work better with the data so that the AI can develop and flourish. So this was already said many times also by Ursula von der Leyen, that we need to be much better in dealing with the data, which is the new currency and new also oil for the new technological endeavors.
On the data question, you have been very central and key to the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, the bloc's new privacy rules. AI is generated and based on the use of that data, both anonymized personal data, industrial data, just data in general. What happens though if that data then, for very legitimate commercial reasons, is leaving the EU to, say, be used by an AI company in South Korea or the United States? Should there be limits on where that data should be transferred to uphold Europe's privacy regime, or should anonymized industrial data be able to flow wherever it wants to, particularly when it comes to uses of AI?
First of all, when it comes to personal data, the rules are very clear that the protection, the high standard of protection of the private data of Europeans has to travel with the data wherever it goes. So you mentioned, I think, United States, and Japan. With Japan, we have the adequacy decision already. With the US, now we have to work with different instruments rather than the adequacy, because after Schrems 2, we cannot use the roof of the privacy shield anymore. When data is anonymized, when it's not the personal data, we have to recognize the need to transfers of data, again, under some conditions. But we need to see that big portion of international trade is now dependent on the free flow of data. And that's why we have to enable such free flows with the necessary safeguards. But of course, for the transfer of anonymized data or non-personal data, the rules are less strict than for the personal data, where the EU is really very, very demanding and vigilant.
There are some within the European Union who would like the data, both personalized and industrial data, to stay closer to home, to be used for companies based within the European Union. Are you a fan of that proposal, or would you prefer to see more, say, a coalition of the willing of Western democracies being able to tap into that data across the board?
I am for this global alliance to create this global space where the protection of data is guaranteed. And this is where we have a big space for international cooperation. I would never like to see Europe as a data fortress. And so I am the defender of the free flow of data under some conditions. Again, I have to say that for personal data, we are very strict, and we have to require very strong guarantees from the third countries where we allow the data travel to have it protected on their territory. But I think that there is some deeper sense of working on this global alliance, because I think that for democratic world, where we share the values, including the protection of privacy as the fundamental right, we should be able to agree on the global standards for the protection of data, for the protection of identities of people, of their personal data. And we should be able to create this alliance where also the international trade will flourish trade, which, as I said before, is very much dependent on the free flow of data. And to create it or to work on this alliance, which should have a competitive advantage compared with those parts of the world where there is no respect for privacy of people and where the technologies are used to have the society under control of the omnipotent state. Of course, here I have in mind the authoritarian regimes, which are also developing technologies, but not technologies which serve the people, rather technologies which serve the regime.
And how would that global alliance look? Is that sort of European Union plus, the G7 countries and maybe some of the G20? What would that alliance look like? Would that be based on specific verticals like data or AI, or would you like to do something more horizontal across all Western democracies?
Yeah, I think the B is the right way. We have to go step by step. So we started with Japan. It was Shinzo Abe who had this idea, which I think his slogan was "Data flow with trust." And trust is a key word here because we have to trust each other when we do the common business where the data is freely flowing. And whether it's G7 or whether it's G20, I think that we should start by discussing the standards, which should be, in my view, very similar or adequate to what we have in GDPR. And it's not just my illusion that GDPR could be used as a global standard. It's has been said by many experts and many knowledgeable people in the world. And also when we discuss the adequacy decisions with the third countries, we hear from our partners that they would like to achieve convergence with the standards which we have in GDPR. So I believe that GDPR is now the global standard, and we should first agree with the like-minded partners on the standards, and then to agree on some timeline which would expect that there will be some actions taken, regulatory actions taken in those countries which would like to form this alliance. And it's not an easy thing because it's not only about the enumeration of the standards of protection of privacy, but it's also about the enforcement line, about who will oversight the protection of privacy, who will, how the people will, or if the people will have a chance to obtain judicial redress in case their data are abused. So it's not a trivial thing, but I believe that it is necessary and it is possible, but we have to start soon.
Now I'm going to show my Anglo-Saxon bias and ask about the US and the UK, two countries that I hold dearly to my own heart. You mentioned trust, and particularly when it comes to data flows, there's obviously ongoing negotiations around a potentially new data transfer with the US, and there are now, frankly, growing questions around a similar deal to be done with the United Kingdom. I would suggest that those two countries are the European Union, some of the European Union's closest allies. And therefore, if trust is not there with those two countries, how can the EU sort of gain the similar trust and the global coalition that you've discussed when you're looking at other countries around the world?
Yeah, of course. I can repeat your question. Who, if not US, who, if not UK? But there is a but. With the US, you know very well the saga around the first Safe Harbor and Privacy Shield, and now we are in the situation when we started the talks with the United States about the future possible arrangement, future possible adequacy decision. There is a lot of optimism on US side. I judge from my talk with Secretary of Commerce Raimondo, and I have to say that, yes, we have to work together on the new arrangement, which will enable the data flows based on more trust, but also more work seen on the US side. And there are two things I want to emphasize. We would really like to see the federal law on data protection, something adequate to the GDPR. Because the European Court of Justice twice ruled that there must be essentially equivalent protection on the other side, in the third country. And you cannot have essentially equivalent protection without seeing the adequate protection enshrined in the law. So it's one thing. The second thing is what I tried to explain to Madame Raimondo, that on the commercial side, we don't see such a big issue. But of course, this is the issue of the access to data from the national security or the agencies and national security bodies. And we have to be absolutely sure that there is no mass surveillance of data of Europeans when it travels to US, that there will be always the probable cause, some justification for the access to data, but first of all, that the people, the Europeans who will see that their private data might have been abused, that they will have the possibility of judicial redress on US side. And we have to, this time, when we have more detailed guidance from our highest court, we have to tailor the new system precisely on this more detailed guidance which we received in Schrems 2 case. It will take more time. In the meantime, I fully understand that the companies, be it on US side, but also on EU side, need more legal certainty. So they will have to work with the standard contractual clauses. We will come with the guidance already, I think, this week, how to apply that. And I want to assure you that we are working with the US side on creating more sustainable and more stable system. With the UK, it's another story, because while in case of US, we would like to see more convergence with our data protection rules. In UK, we would not like to see some divergence, because UK is now the third country, unfortunately. I am not Anglo-Saxon, but I have to say that I'm very much sorry about the UK leaving the EU. But UK is applying GDPR in full. And we have trust that they will keep the rules, either untouched or rules which are now equivalent to GDPR, which will not deviate from the main lines of the GDPR. And I know that, for instance, in the Data Protection Board or European Parliament, there are questions marks about especially the onboard transfers and about the access to data, again, from the security bodies. But we had to So we are not underestimating these possible risks, but that's why we embedded the revision clause, which will enable us to stop the arrangement and which will oblige us to do the revision of how it works in 4 years' time. So again, who, if not UK, at this moment, if we do not encourage ourselves to adopt the adequacy decision on UK, then what the other partners will think about how rigid the EU is. Yeah, we have to have courage, and again, we have to have trust towards the UK that they will not deviate totally somewhere else from the spirit of the GDPR.
So just a couple of follow-ups on the US side. As you say, a key point is judicial redress for EU citizens in terms of when US national security agencies potentially may access their data, and what EU citizens can do to stop that, or at least take that to court. From your perspective, do you think that can be done through legislation, or would you be willing to accept an executive order from the Biden administration in terms of assurances that EU citizens do have sufficient redress through US courts?
To have a legally binding rule on the US side guaranteeing this, it's of course the best and the strongest way to do that. Because what was the weak point in Privacy Shield arrangement? That there was something too voluntary, too maybe uncertain, especially when it comes to the Ombudsperson's office. There were written guarantees. There was a lot of assurances from the US side that the Ombudsperson's office will be impartial, that it will be independent from the state administration, that it will openly inform the EU citizen who will lodge the complaint about what happened to his or her data. But still, there was some space for uncertainty, and of course the Court of Justice discovered that and addressed that in the ruling. So a legally binding rule would be very useful. I would even say necessary. Also, the order regarding the access to data from the side of NSA and other security agencies would be useful to have something more precise and more assuring, because we worked under the conditions of Obama's rules, and which were following the Snowden's revelations. And I have to say that it was a hell of a big work to do, to push the US side to give us the interpretation, how they read the order, how they do it in practice, what are the different options of dealing with the data, how they guarantee that the probable cause is always in place, because we needed to see the adequate application of what we have in our European rules, that the access to data can be only when it's necessary and proportionate. That's the probable cause on the US side. And we needed written assurances, and still it was not enough for the court. So now we have, paradoxically, the Schrems II ruling gives us more potential and more strength to push our US partners to do more.
And then just on the UK side, just so I want to make sure I am 100% clear, your view is that although maybe those within the European Parliament and the European Data Protection Board may be being a bit too rigid in their interpretation of adequacy with the United Kingdom, if the Brits do deviate too much from GDPR and their sort of assurances and promises under their own domestic legislation linked to GDPR, you would be willing to walk away from adequacy with the UK?
Of course, we will not have any other option. You understand it right. Because for the moment, of course, we are monitoring what the UK is doing with the protection of private data. For the time being, we trust that they will not deviate out of the framework. And what we have to see on the UK side is that the protection of data is essentially equivalent to what we have in the EU. It has never been meant also by the Court of Justice as a copy-paste situation. Yeah, we want to see the essentially equivalent protection, which is the quote from the Schrems I ruling. And once we see the deviation which leaves the framework of essentially equivalent protection, of course we will have to act. And I understood the members of the European Parliament. I spoke to several members who I cooperate with for years, and I know their concerns. They are always very vigilant, but they only take the perspective of protection of privacy, while I think that the Commission always was also looking at the protection of economy and also protection of security. So it's not just one angle issue. So we will act if when we see the development in UK which goes outside the framework.
Wonderful. Okay, so London, you heard that. Be careful what you wish for. We're coming to the end of the conversation, so I would like to thank the Vice President for joining us today. So thank you very much, Vera. It's been lovely to chat with you again. And now it's the end of the summit, unfortunately, so I'll have to sort of call it quits. I just want to say thank you so much for everyone who's dialed in, asked questions, participated. This wouldn't happen without you, so thank you very much. And I hope you were able to connect virtually with other participants, and hopefully we can do this again in person next year. Again, a few thank yous before we leave. I'd like to thank our leading partner, Microsoft, our presenting partners, NVIDIA and Google, as well as our supporting organizations, the Future Society, France Digital, the OECD, the 2021 Portuguese presidency of the EU, the European Law Institute, and the Patrick McGovern Foundation for making this event possible. So thank you very much. I'd also like to thank all my colleagues at Politico, both on the reporting and event side for making this happen. This really wouldn't happen without you. And finally, and then I will let you go, this is just one of the many events that Politico has planned for 2021, hopefully increasingly in person rather than doing this virtually. Just to name a few, we have the second Competitive Europe Summit, which is scheduled to take place between June 29th and 30th, which will cover everything from Europe's competition framework to trade policy to tech sovereignty. So make sure you check that out, and as well as other events on the Politico Live page. And most importantly, our next AI Summit will take place again next year on April 21st. And with that, thank you for joining us. Thank you to watching Politico Live, and have a wonderful evening.